Good morning, guys. This video is all about everything you didn't know about knee healing. Coming from someone who had injured knees for the longest time, I personally know just how much of what's out there is backwards. There seems to be an abundance of information, but abundance of stuff that doesn't do very much. It doesn't help you very much. That's often because it's lacking context, but also because it's simply wrong. A lot of the research that comes out or a lot of what people repeat, because things have always been said before. There's so many words, there's so much research that have already been said. We're often going to be repeating stuff, but we can very easily fall into the trap of repeating what doesn't work. Don't let your knees go over your toes is total crap. And sometimes I forget to remind people of that because it's now been 4 or 5 years where I've known how backwards that is. I forget that some people still believe that's true. It's absolutely crazy to me. So I'm just going to break down some key areas of what you might not have ever looked at when it comes to healing your knees today. So first off, we're going to move into the toes. Here in high school in New Zealand, one of the first things we get when you take PE in year 11, one of the topics covered is base of support. And we do a whole lot of balance exercises that are basically supposed to teach you the wider your base of support, the more stable you are. And we talk about being on 1 foot versus 2 feet. But what if 1 foot is narrower compared to what it could be? So often with restrictive shoes, we have toes that have squished together. And this actually results in a narrower foot, and a narrower base of support is a less stable base of support. So if your feet are squished and mushed and aren't as spread as they could or should be, then you're naturally going to have less balance and you're going to further the risk of injury up the chain. So with our toes, it's very important that we learn to correctly spread them and reverse the damage that narrow shoes have done to us. Then we need to learn to activate them and control them. So we have a lot broader of a range of motion in our toes than most people realize because they've simply never been taught this. And we have a lot more control. If you think about coming from monkeys, our feet were essentially hands. They used to have the dexterity of thumbs and hands, and they still can, not quite like hands, but so much more so than the meat lump sacks on the bottom of our body that we treat them as. Nextly, looking at your ankles. So if you see the purple line across this man's ankle here, you can see the inside of his ankle has dropped a lot lower than the outside of his ankle. And this is, you might have heard of, or you might have collapsed arches. And what we do in order to correct this is, you can think of as laziness or a lack of activation in certain muscles. So if he was about to take a squat right now, or let's say he's standing here, maybe 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, what we want him to think of is putting his weight, the weight of his body, into the outside edge of his foot. Right now, all of his weight is on the inside edge of his foot, running from along his big toe all the way back to the heel on the inside. In order to lift his ankles and his arches up, he needs to shift some of his weight until the outside edge of his foot. Now, this is really important because collapsed ankles leads to excess internal rotation higher up the chain, and it actually changes the alignment of the whole body, not in a positive way. It puts us totally out of whack and very, very different from how we're supposed to be. So to dive into that further, knee internal rotation. Now, you may or may not get this from the ankle internal rotation, but either way, knee internal rotation is a big issue. Now, you've probably seen, I think on the right, the guy with pale legs, you've probably seen people squat this poorly. You might not have it yourself, and you might look at that and clearly see how wrong that is. You might be something more like the guy on the left in the red shoes, and his knee is just slightly internally rotated. So as you drop down in a squat, we want to look at this after picture here. His knees are actually going out to the side, and you want your knees to be bending down and out in alignment with your second toe. So not the big toe, the toe next to the big toe. With any knee bend movement you're doing, the knees should be dropping out in alignment with that second toe rather than dropping down and inwards. Down and inwards puts pressure into the joint. It takes away the space. So we get the bone on bone, cartilage on cartilage, compressing, squeezing, everything in nasty ways that we don't want, rather than the joint being nice and open and fluid and moving through the range of motion that it's actually supposed to have. So very, very common here. Whenever you are doing work in the gym, or maybe even in your running, take a look at the position of your ankles, take a look at the position of your arches, and take a look at the position of your knees. These are probably the most common issues with people's knees, is simply being in the wrong position. You might not have a weakness, you might not have too much of an issue going on. Your body has just learnt faulty angles for its movement patterns. Next up, we're going to move into the lower abdominals versus the hip flexors. So because of sitting, oftentimes our hip flexors beneath these guys have become short and tight. Now, there's something called the law of facilitation. If you've ever seen raindrops running down a pane of window glass, you notice how when a streak starts to form, all of the droplets converge and they all go down this same streak. That's because it's easiest. There's momentum there. The path has already been caved out. The shorter and tighter a muscle becomes, the easier it is for the nervous system to send a signal there. Because our hips are so short and tight, they so easily receive nervous system signals that sometimes, because of the proximity between the lower abdominals and the hip flexors have an easier route of communication. So they steal the signals that are supposed to go to our lower abdominals. So the hip flexors are supposed to be for flexing the leg. They're supposed to be for lifting your femur bone. But they start to take on the lower abdominals role of stabilizing the pelvis. And already, if you have a sense of anatomy, you can tell how much of an issue that is, because stabilizing the pelvis would mean keeping it in place, but flexing our legs means making some movement to it. So the hip flexors can't actually do both jobs, even though they try to. So oftentimes, people's lower abdominals are entirely inactive, and their hip flexors are doing far, far too much. And basically, the hip flexors can't correctly stabilize the hips, and the lower abdominals are no longer getting the signal to stabilize the hips. And we basically have huge issues running through the pelvis. Now, this video has already been flying along. I just want to wrap it up with one more thing, which is this reminder. If it looks shit, it is. Always remember this in the gym. If a movement looks painful and like it's causing damage, it most likely is causing damage. Now, there's times where you don't fully need perfect. Well, there's times when you might get thrown out of perfect form. And still, we don't want that. But life is life, and it happens. And I have never seen someone do everything perfect every time. And if they are, they're probably not pushing themselves very hard. But if something looks wrong, uncomfortable, sticky, clunky, or potentially damaging in the gym, it often is. Collapsed shoulders, head forwards, awkward angles, tight positions, unnatural movements. We have a very good danger indicator built into our head. So if you're in the middle of something and it isn't looking right, it isn't feeling right, chances are there's something just slightly off about it. The closer you move to optimal, or what you think of as neutral posture, or a strong activated posture, the better. And the further away, the lazier you are in your movement. Think about it. I often find with whole body or leg movements, people's upper body is all over the place. They're slouching their shoulders, their necks curled up, they're shrugging their traps, they're looking in multiple directions, their chin tucked, their eyes on the floor. It's rubbish. You need to be powerful and correctly positioning your whole body in every single movement. I say it again. I don't care what movement it is. Every single movement you do in the gym, in sport, in training needs to be done with correct whole body activation and awareness of where you're actually at in space. Okay, that was a little deep dive into some of the common causes or the unknowns about knee healing. If you'd like more of these, if you have anything you'd like me to dive further into and dive a little bit deeper on, please let me know. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Send me a message on Instagram of what you thought, where I'm wrong, where I'm right, what you would like more of.